I am Bob Humphrey. I'm here with my co-host, David Trahan, the Executive Director of the Sportsman's Alliance of Maine. And our guest today is Gerry Lavigne. For you younger folks who don't know the name, he is, when it comes to deer hunting and deer management in Maine, wherever he goes, he's the smartest guy in the room. He was Maine's deer biologist for how many years?
30.
30 years, during some pretty important times in deer management for the state. So today, because it's cold and wintry outside, we're going to talk about deer in the winter survival, maybe a little bit about coyote hunting, and a lot about deer feeding. And I want to kick this off with a little. I was doing some digging the other day, and I came upon this from an interview I did with you 20 years ago. At which time the deer kill that year was 28,148. And it's a little bit out of context, but you said if we can succeed in restoring winter habitat to the north and east and solve the access problem, we can safely winter 480,000 deer and hold the harvest at 50,000.
Was that only 20 years ago?
That was 20 years ago.
Gosh, I retired 20 years ago. Was that my last year of employment?
Yeah.
And then I bailed out. Well, 20 years later, I think we broke 50,000 in the harvest.
Yeah, we hit 55,873 according to the latest that I saw on the interactive map.
That's a lot of deer.
So let's talk about that a little bit. Does that mean that we had 480,000 deer on the land? Was that a spike? Are we there? And if so, can we hold those deer there? And with all this, the new deer wintering area initiative, could we see that even grow more?
Well, I'm no longer with the department. I no longer follow their statistics closely. But I'd be willing to bet that the lion's share, again, of this record harvest came in the central and southern part of the state. Mm-hmm. And that's a direct result of the change in management into a antlerless deer permit and not an any deer permit with a one deer limit. Now with the antlerless permit, you can buy multiple permits to kill multiple does to reach the department's objectives. And I'll point out too, though, that when the department switched to that, it was based on Sam's recommendation to start with. Again, Sam was in the forefront of new change in management for deer in the state. The northern part of the state is still a basket case because we have not restored enough winter habitat to achieve that type of a goal. And in addition, the northern part of the state desperately needs more coyote management to accompany deer wintering area management because managing the timber without managing the predation problem is going to cause you to fail. Mm. So we're still kind of hobbling along in the north, but we're making progress.
Yeah. I want to speak to that for a minute because that time that you were the department's deer biologist, I served on the Inland Fisheries and Wildlife Committee. Served for 12 years, and then I've been at SAM for 14. So 26 years I've followed your career. When you came up to the podium, the committee listened because they always respected what you had to say, and I think that is true today, and you've kept that reputation. Now, getting back to your...
How'd that work out a couple of years ago?
Well, there's been some times where there's some conflicts, but you know what? People who are blunt and say things that need to be said out loud oftentimes can get not criticized, but be controversial and cause some trouble. But you got to hear the truth before you can address the problem. And I think going back, I remember, I don't think I know, after the spruce budworm infestation, and we lost millions of acres of spruce and fir up north, it changed completely in the state. Now, your question around can we harvest 55,000? If that northern, eastern, and western Maine habitat through time is restored and can hold those deer, I think a statewide harvest could be achievable in that range. But like Gerry was speaking to, if you've only got 5 or 6 deer per square mile, you're not going to reach those numbers.
One thing that we tend to underestimate is that where winters are mild and food availability is really good, we can hold so many deer in the central and southern part of the state that it would really create a lot of social problems. One of the last things I did the last 15 years of my tenure at Fish and Wildlife was to estimate what is the carrying capacity of the different wildlife management districts and what would the population and harvest look like if we brought them to just 50% of that carrying capacity. Now, Bob, as a biologist, you know maximum sustained yield and all that. That would be the maximum harvest for the reproductive rate. Yeah. And by 2000, we had a healthy deer population in the central part of the state, and we weren't harvesting them to the degree we could, and yet we were getting complaints about road kills and garden damage and things like that. I think people have gotten a little more tolerant of those things because we have a heck of a lot more deer today. But at that time, based on the condition of the deer, the biology of the deer, we were still only 35 to 40% of maximum carrying capacity. And that was with a herd of 35 deer per square mile. You could bring this herd all the way up to 100 per square mile, and at that point, they'd be malnourished and in poor condition. But that's the capacity of the land to support deer. It's just a matter now, the department's challenge is how many deer are socially acceptable in the central and southern part. And they're kind of tinkering with that because now they're bringing the harvest up and trying to control these numbers and try to stabilize the deer herd a little bit.
So I want to jump in and talk about the changes we made to the antlerless permits and being able to buy multiple permits. We took that problem, which was a herd that could sustain more than one permit per person. In other words, me as a hunter, I can go buy 5, 6, 7 permits if the land will take that kind of harvest. We turned, with your support and your advisory, Sam went in and we restructured that permit system. And there's been a lot of grumbling about having to pay for a permit, but I want people to understand what happens with that money.
Exactly.
It is. So what happens to that $12 that you pay for that permit is it goes into the deer management fund. And that deer management fund, 100% of the money goes to managing deer wintering areas, managing predation, and purchasing deer wintering areas in eastern, northern, and western Maine. Now, for you people that are listening, that money is matched 3 to 1 by federal Pittman-Robertson dollars. So that means for every $1, we end up with 4 to buy those deer wintering areas, and we've purchased.
And again, I'd like to reiterate that was SAM legislation that we were able to accomplish all of those things in deer management to help the department really have the funding base to do what they need to do to manage the deer. Now, for a long time, the department had not owned their own wintering areas, so they didn't have direct control over the timber harvest schedule, road building schedule, and this type of thing. And this funding source now allows the department to generate the income they need to acquire and manage, because begging a timberland owner who has different objectives to save timber for deer is not a real successful formula. We need 500,000 acres of wintering habitat in good condition in the northern half of the state, northern 2/3 of the state. We're nowhere near that. The Bureau of Public Lands has under their control 100,000. Fish and Wildlife now has 10,000 and about to grow. And the rest of it is under Land Use Regulation Commission zoning things like that from the 70s. And all of those other two are vulnerable to differing timber harvest strategies as far as the deer go. The other complication here is there's quite a bit of habitat up there that's under legal protection and still has a coniferous forest, but has no deer. Round Pond, which is in the Allagash region, which is under the Bureau of Public Lands Control, is one example. That thriving deer population is now almost non-existent. And the reason is we didn't take care of predation at the same time we took care of forest management.
So you just opened the box and led right into a loaded question I was going to fire at you. I've asked this of the state several times, and I don't have the numbers in my head, but the department, the state owns and the department manages how many, I don't know how many, 30,000 acres or something along those lines, and Department of Conservation, another 100,000 or 300,000, most of which is not actively managed as deer wintering areas. Now, I've asked them, why not? You mean to tell me that none of that land could be managed and developed in 15, 30, 75 years, could not be converted into viable deer wintering habitat? And they said, no, can't. None of it can.
Well, I can answer
And
that.
I think that's a
because
bunch
it's
of poop.
It is, and it's a political question that I don't think it's fair to ask Gerry to answer, so I will. The Department of Conservation and Forestry relies on a portion of timber sales to pay for their budget. And most of these lots were purchased with the idea that wood would be cut off of them to help support state government. Now, that policy hasn't changed, and it needs to change. I know I've tried several times to bring policies to change that. You're right. You can bring that habitat back to a healthy habitat to support deer. But the legislature is going to have to come up with money to replace what they don't harvest. I get calls all the time, especially in the winter.
Well, if we could double the deer herd in northern Maine, that would bring a heck of a lot of money into
they
the
don't
state.
see the value in it. What they see for value is in growing a tree to be harvested, and that's just the culture of that department. Now, that was why when we submitted the legislation to start buying and managing deer yards, it would not let it be managed by the Bureau of Parks and Lands. It had to be at IF&W.
Yeah, and that was a very wise move to put that stop to it.
Yeah. They're at now 10,000 acres, some up in the Rangeley area, Jackman area, Aroostook County, several in Aroostook County. I think one in the top of, well, it would be the bottom of Aroostook County. But anyway, I want to get to the what we could have going forward. What has happened is some of the landowners, bigger ones, are now paying attention to this revenue source for buying deer yards. They have 1 million acres. They might have 125,000 acres that would be good deer wintering area. Now they see value. So they're going to bargain with that deer wintering area because now it's sought after. So they see it having more value. They're going to want top dollar for it. But that, in long term, it's my opinion that we would have to change the attitude at Bureau of Parks and Lands. We would also have to change them harvesting for the purposes of revenue. There's a lot more to the value of a forest than just the trees.
Mm-hmm.
Well, by statute, their very budget is tied to what they can cut.
That's right.
To some degree.
Yeah.
So that's a legislative challenge.
It is a legislative challenge. We should do it, though, because you are correct. That forest, the deer wintering area, this is important for the listeners, it sustains 50 iconic wildlife species besides the white-tailed deer. So when you are managing for a deer wintering area, you're managing for the most iconic of all of our species, whether it's owls, birds of prey, you name it, bats, they all benefit from an older forest. So that's an important component.
There's one more element, and it's kind of a bright light that is out there, but it's not focused on us very often. And that is the amount of land in the northern half of the state that is in some form of conservation protection. and like for example, the Nature Conservancy, the Forest Society of Maine, as a group, they have protected 3 million acres of forest land. A lot of it still allowing timber harvest, but under very severe restrictions. And when you think about where deer wintering areas are, they're in the riparian zones along rivers, streams, and lakes. And that's where these conservation agencies, non-governmental agencies, have focused to protect land. So you're not going to see these river corridors, stream corridors, and ponds be completely numbed like they were in the 70s because of this protection. And in time, it's going to grow into a coniferous forest, probably a mixed softwood-dominated coniferous forest, and it's only a matter of how wide a buffer did they put on either side of the stream. And the wider the better for deer survival, but more back in the 50s, more than 85% of our deer yards in the northern half of the state were in these riparian zones along water.
There is one
deer
concern
gravitate.
There is one concern I have, though. Some of these conservation groups do not allow predation control. They limit access for hunting and whatnot. So, yeah, they may be great wintering areas, but if you're not managing coyotes in those deer wintering areas appropriately, then you're going to have a problem. And they buy big chunks. They don't, it's pretty hard to access when there's a gate, 1,500 acre parcel, and you can't get past the gate. So there's some work that we have to do in cooperation with some of these conservation.
No doubt.
So perfect transition. And again, it's amazing the things that I retain and the things that I lose. But you worked on a document some time ago about coyote predation in Maine, and I think in there you contended that at that time, which was when 80s maybe, you said coyotes kill at least as many deer as hunters. Now that was 30 years ago. What about now? What's the issue? How do we solve it?
That was a legislative report that was done, I think, in 1996.
Okay.
Yeah. And I got some criticism for that from the department.
Yeah, and I think I was on the committee and said, Mr. Lavigne, how many deer are killed or how many fawns are killed by bears? And then you had responded the equivalent amount of what coyotes.
At the time, what I did was we had biological indices that allow us to learn the total amount of mortality on the deer herd, and you get that from the age structure of the herd. And one thing the biologists in Maine Fish and Wildlife are good at is getting a representative sample of the age structure during the harvest, during the hunting season. When you can see the total estimate against a population estimate, and so now we're looking at, let's say, 30% of the deer population dies each year. And then you start whittling off those that we know about. We know about the registered kill during hunting. We have an estimate, used to have an estimate of the wounding loss. The road kills were enumerated, not very well, but then you can deal with that. When we go through all of those other knowns, I had 30,000 deer that I couldn't account for. And that's where the estimate of coyote predation comes in. But that was a minimal estimate in this way, Bob. It did not account for the thousands of newborn fawns that are taken by predators every June and July.
So it could and probably is significantly higher.
Yeah.
I assume that was based on, was it recent or historical?
Current
at that time, 1996.
Right.
So now we're 30 years later.
The coyotes aren't eating more mice.
We have more coyotes now than we did then.
I'm not sure.
I don't think we do.
I'm not sure.
Well, at least their impact isn't as significant
Yeah.
as it was then.
And the studies from the Carolinas and Georgia have shown they've enumerated 25 to 50% of fawns are killed. That's in a place where there's no snow. The deer don't congregate in deer yards.
Yeah.
So imagine what they're doing up here.
Yeah, and in the southeastern U.S., the biggest problem was not predation of adults. They could scavenge all year round with just roadkills down there. But when you target deer that are less than a month old and reduce the number of deer that are replacing the mortality in the population, you can set a population right to a standstill or a decline, depending on how much. And at the time, as long as we were harvesting does, we could get another estimate of how productive they are and how successful they were in bringing off an offspring to October. It's called recruitment. And it's all about just checking the doe during hunting season. If the hunter didn't cut out the bag, check it for milk. Because even though the fawns are weaned in August, they still maintain that fawn maternal bond by periodic nursing. It's almost like just an emotional thing. And so the doe, until at least she gets into winter, is still producing a little bit of milk. So we examined as many does as we could, and we could extrapolate from that how many fawns had died between the 1st of June and October. Coupled with that, though, at the time, biologists and wardens were examining roadkill does in the spring to see how many fetuses, how many fawns they had in utero when they were hit by cars. And that gave us an estimate of the initial productivity, and then the lactation index gave us an estimate of the drop in production based on summer mortality.
So they don't just make this stuff up or pull it out of a black box. There's real legitimate science behind it.
Yeah, although I've been accused of that by numerous angry hunters who can't find deer 30, 40 years ago. But as we went along with this, we tried to develop an index for every little part of the mortality picture and the population picture at that time, and it kept us in the field. It kept us busy. We're not doing much of that today. So that's a concern of mine. I've been retired now 20 years, and I wonder how comfortable they are with their estimates because they're not generating the direct field evidence to the degree they used to, except for looking at the harvest. They're still doing that.
So department folks, if you're out there listening, how comfortable are you with the estimates?
So I'm going to segue into that a little bit. I've had more conservative view on continuing to expand the killing of does, even in the southern part of the state. I personally feel like we're one or two bad winters away from a real crash in the population. And why I say that, and I want to segue into feeding. And you had asked me earlier off mic, why I was feeding deer this year. I want to speak to that in just a minute. If we get the population, we're not doing carrying capacity anymore. We're doing social carrying capacity.
Right.
Okay. Well, what happens if we get 2 or 3 bad winters in a row and we lose 30% of the deer population like we've done in the past? These days of wonderful hunting, all of a sudden, they're gone. And the amount of complaints that are going to be back on the department are going to be huge.
But if you have, let's say you have 50% of the biological carrying capacity that you're maintaining now, and you kill 30% during the hunting season. If you have more deer, then there'll be more deer left over going into the winter. And if we have a hard winter, it's going to make it harder on all those deer. Where if you have fewer deer, there may be a better probability that more survive, even though it's a smaller number. Is that legitimate, or did I just make that up?
I'll have my answer. Maybe
Yeah,
you'll have a different one.
there's a certain logic to that.
There is.
But one thing I want to back up one step is, and talking about the department and its criticism of my criticism of their field data, or lack of it. It's easy to be comfortable when you've got a burgeoning deer population and a string of mild winters. And that's been the situation on average for the last decade or so. But we did have some monstrous kills in 2008 and 2009, if you recall, where even the central and southern part of the state took a licking. In the north, at that time, believe it or not, by 2010, the north was down at least 75% from their low population prior to that. So they took it on the chin. When those winters return, you are, Dave, you're correct. We're going to see a pretty high mortality because a lot of deer are no longer following the tradition of traveling to wintering areas in the central and southern part. So they're going to look around and say, where the heck can I go to get away from this snow? You know, so there's going to be a problem with that.
I agree, and that's why this year I decided early on that I was going to feed deer. Now, what happened? I live in Waldoboro, which is in the mid-coast. There were no acorns and no apples to speak of. A few apples there were. The turkeys got them early. So all there was left was grass. And what was happening, you were seeing a lot of deer coming out into the fields because they had nothing else to eat, other than edge feed maybe on the edge of the field with hardwood tips and whatnot. So we were seeing at our home 15 to 20 deer in two separate fields, and there were a lot of little ones. I mean late fawns, and there were some deer shot. And what happened was, as it got closer, it got really cold. I don't know if people have noticed, but late December and early January have been very cold for the mid-coast. We don't usually see days below zero. So I said to my wife, without having a lot to eat, maybe we should feed them this year. Now, I have done that before, but this is the setup. We live at the end of the road named after our family. It's at the end of a dirt road, and it's about a half a mile away from any road. So that is step one, to make sure that we weren't killing deer on the road. And then the second thing was, I don't go out expecting to feed 25 deer. What I try to do is I cut wood for the family, and I sell it commercially. So I cut hardwood in the wintertime. Gives the deer something to eat. And then I try to supplement the fawns seem, and the moms with two, and we have several of them, will come up close to the house, but the more weary deer seem to stay away, stay down in the hardwood tops. We don't do a big feeding, really just... What my concern is that the fawns that are inside the does now, if they're on the edge of starvation, we'll lose those fawns. And then a lot of the small deer, and I mean there's some small fawns in the 40 to 60 pound class that are coming out, they'll be the first ones to go. So that was the logic behind it. But you said something before we went on mic that I think is important. Why are you feeding? Are you feeding to see the deer in your backyard, or are you feeding to help the deer? And I think that was a really good question.
Well, it was a multi-part question.
And you followed that with,
do the deer need the help right
That's
now?
exactly right. And that's what I wanted to segue into, is we need your opinion on that.
do they?
From what I can see in central and southern Maine, they do not need to be artificially fed. No.
Okay. Well, that helps me because that's $17 a bag for
Up north?
grain.
Yes. It's a different situation up north. And it's a situation that can hurt the deer up north just as quick as it can help them. If you begin feeding deer and the deer develop a tradition of coming to your location and they abandon their traditional wintering habitat, when then there's a good likelihood that if you don't feed them enough food frequently enough, then you're going to have some starvation loss right in the midst of plenty. And not all deer are equal. Deer with a concentrated, limited food resource, there's a lot of social interaction in which the most aggressive bucks take the lion's share, and they'll boot the does out. The most aggressive does will take their share and boot even their own fawns away. And you see that in video after video. Oh, incidentally,
That's right.
in the year 2000, while I was still working for the department, we published an hour-long video on whether or not to feed deer. And I don't know where that video is today.
I bet it's out there somewhere. But also, you produced this lovely document.
Yep.
So when I came to Sam as director, and Gerry mentioned it earlier, that this was one of the first projects that I asked him to work on, was to educate on, if you are going to feed deer, on how to do it responsibly. And if you want to speak to that, Gerry, I think you're the best person, you and Bob, as biologists, to talk to. Why I know of a personal situation in which somebody thought they were doing the right thing feeding deer. They were getting hit by cars. He was feeding them the wrong thing, and it ended up killing some deer. And I said, well, we've got to do some education work, because if we're going to do this, does it matter if it's killed by a car or shot at night or it dies because it's been fed the wrong thing? The end result is you have dead deer unnecessarily. So this was all about trying to educate that. If you want to speak to that.
Yep. Again, in order to not look ridiculous, what you feed a deer in a situation here today, mild winter, central Maine, doesn't make a big difference. You know, you can feed them apples, you can feed them oats, you can feed them this, because frankly, they're getting most of their calories and the balance of their diet somewhere else, not in your driveway. Okay? But if you've told the deer in, and if you've told an entire population in, within their wintering area or away from their wintering area, and now they are fully dependent on you for all of their nutrition, you better provide a balanced diet. Deer need calories in the winter to maintain body heat. They also need protein to maintain body function. If they're not getting enough calories or protein, and they're bottled up in your little feeding area, then they're going to start losing weight. So you want to be providing, if you're providing a supplement, make it a balanced 12% protein. There's plenty of them on the market. You could even go to the ag store and use their 12% cattle feed, and that's balanced enough for deer in the wintertime. If you feed the deer that are totally dependent on you for their survival nutritionally, only oats, only apples, only corn, only hay, you're going to kill them. Eventually, they're going to die. And if you begin feeding deer, you do it early, when they're still in good condition in early December, and they can transition their flora in their paunch, the bacteria that digest things, to this new diet. Sometimes deer kill themselves coming into your feeder, and they gorge on your feed, and they're used to a very fibrous diet before that, and the bacteria just say, whoopee!
Yeah.
They go nuts. The bacteria proliferate. The temperature inside the paunch goes up. Different chemicals are produced by the bacteria, and the lining of the paunch, which is crucial for absorbing nutrients, becomes degraded and killed. Within a few days, a deer's dead.
So if you wait until now, January, and you start putting out 50-pound bags of corn, it's
If
essentially
you wait
like
to
running.
well, again, if you wait till January where they don't really need your food, it's not going to be a big impact. But if you've got
But it's like running straight gas through your chainsaw for the deer's digestive system.
what's say that again?
If you start now, they've been eating coarse woody browse for forever. Primarily now they're eating that, and then you start to feed corn now.
Yeah,
gonna
but
burn
they're
them
probably not. They're probably not showing up to your feeder, gut empty, hungry, because they've already got a good mix of browse in there already. Okay, but let's take a situation you're in, and I've seen a lot of those when I was working for the department. Big feeding areas in the northern part of the state and the western part, and you got a situation where the snow built up real quick, and you've got deer all bottled in there, and you're feeding hundreds of pounds of feed, and still the deer are gonna take it on the chin. Deer need 2 to 3 pounds of this stuff per day, and it needs to be allocated to all the deer, not just to the most dominant ones. And so that speaks to making it available either in a trough situation 24/7, so that once one deer fills up, other deer, the lesser dominant ones, can come in. And they had a good situation with that in the Forks back when I was working. But they were too close to the road, and we persuaded them to move it a half a mile in, and they did it, and that helped.
To that point, though, I want to say that the committee, and we helped with this, has massaged the regulations to allow biologists in the department, when a feeding site is doing more harm than good, to require them to be moved, to place them more responsible
Right.
place. And you helped with that. I know you did.
Yeah.
That was a positive move. I was getting reports of over 100 deer being killed in the road going to feeding sites.
Oh yeah, in one feeding site.
In one feeding site.
Along Route 201 in the Forks,
Yes.
for a couple winters in a row, the wardens tallied, close to 100 right on Route 201. But that part of that problem is the deer kind of want both sides of the highway. They want the shore of the Kennebec as well as the ridge line on the other side of 201, and that was a hard habit to break.
Yeah.
But when I was working on the deer feeding recommendations and the video and that type of thing, I would visit some of these larger deer feeding areas: Rockwood, Jackman, Oquasac, Wilson's Mills. Wilson's Mills at that point had been feeding deer every year since the 50s, and they were using town money. They were appropriating
from the town budget.
yeah, every year to feed deer, and they were killing a lot of deer still. I would go. The 2001 winter was pretty severe, and I wanted to get an idea of mortality on the ground, so I went to several of these after the snow was gone. And you go out back, something that the people who feed deer should do to see if you're doing it right. But I went out back and I just circled around all through, and I would find several carcasses, multiple carcasses, primarily of young of the year, starved to death right at a feeding situation. What are we gaining if we're not feeding enough? In 2001 at Oquasac, this is kind of interesting. I'm walking along in this logging road behind the feeder about several hundred yards, and it's May, about the 3rd of May, and up jumps a deer right at my feet. It was last year's fawn that's now almost a year old. And that deer was just a rack of bones to the point where he couldn't get out of his own way. I was 54 years old. I outran that deer and tagged it, touched it. And it's just mere chance that a coyote had not found that deer yet. But also around there were carcasses. So there's a risk of starvation when you concentrate these deer. One thing you can guarantee is going to happen is that the deer also are going to overbrowse the surrounding vegetation. And that's a critical problem no matter where you feed them. If you've got a neighbor with an expensive shrubbery, think twice, because you're liable for it. Number two, if you're doing forest management as part of this feeding site, you're probably going to have difficulty regenerating anything you cut. And Wilson's Mills had that problem 20 years ago. The third aspect of this, if you feed deer, recognize that you've brought a large number of deer into a small area with a small trail system, and now you've made them more vulnerable to predation. If there's one lesson for this entire podcast, if you're feeding deer on a large scale, you've got to also incorporate predation control, coyote predation control with it, or you're wasting your money.
Well, what you've done for me is I know what our family's going to do. I had this discussion with my wife is we're going to try to do natural habitat improvements, whether it's bringing back our old apple trees, planting new apple trees, bringing in forage to try to get the deer as healthy as possible going into the winter. And I think that's probably, I've come to the conclusion that's the best we can do, because I think there's too many drawbacks to feeding that we may be doing more harm than good. But having good habitat and good healthy food source for them going into the winter seems to be the best approach.
Did you know that the Sportsman's Alliance has its own proprietary food plot mixture?
It does.
If instead of feeding the deer, plant some of this, whether you hunt them or not, near their wintering areas, and that will help put them in a condition prior to winter where they can be fat and sassy, and they can take some normal winter weather.
To that point, if anyone wants to get information, they can go to our website. You can also call our office, 207-623-4589. You can go to sportsmansalliancemaine.org and get information on our website. We also have a Facebook page. You can come there. I would encourage folks to join SAM. You can do so by contacting our office. Again, I just gave you the information. But if you want to do your part to help deer, we have all the literature produced by the best people to do it that can put it together.
Yeah, I want to put in a shameless plug for Sam, too, because it's come up several times. We've got informational documents here. We've got deer wintering area legislation. We've got antlerless deer legislation. We've got legislation that moves the funding from antlerless deer tags to protect deer wintering areas. We've got books about coyote predation, trapping, and hunting. All this stuff is from Sam. So if you're not a member, what has Sam done for me? Well, hit rewind and listen to this from the beginning again. A ton of stuff, and we continue to do more. But let's go into this one now, the third leg of the stool, because you've mentioned it several times. Talk about predation, coyote hunting and trapping, removing predators to carry deer through the winter.
Sure.
I know it's not a popular subject for you.
You're a coyote hunter yourself, Gerry. A little history on that.
Yes, I am. I'm a night hunter,
Yes, a night hunter for coyotes. Let's make that clear.
One thing I realized starting in the late 1970s through the late 80s, while working for the department, we did a study that verified what the hunters were telling us all along. The old adage that I heard when I was in college way back when was predators only take the old, the weak, and the sick. And so therefore they don't have a big impact on the population.
I think that's such a low...
Because they're going to die anyway.
Yeah, this is not a Disney movie.
Yeah. But I actually was taught that in college. I don't know about you, but they didn't give a lot of details beyond this. All right, and they gave some examples of how predator control doesn't work. They were wrong. In 1978, the department initiated a deer coyote study, the old school style, by actually going in the woods and finding deer that died from one cause or another, and examining them to see what the cause was and what the condition of the deer was. Now, if they're just taking the old and weak and the sick, then controlling coyotes is not going to be productive. It's not going to help one bit.
And that's why they kept saying that they only take the weak, the sick.
And right, and then
Sounds good.
in the course of this 10-year study, we collected data on 763 coyote-killed deer. Regional biologists, game wardens, myself, I coordinated it. And we examined the deer based on determining its age to age class by taking a jaw, a tooth, and also a leg bone. Now, the long bone in the leg is filled with fat in the fall, and that fat is a source of energy for the deer during the course of the winter. And in fact, a fat deer can be as much as 30% fat in the fall and going into the winter. And gradually that fat supply whittles down. One of the last sources of fat to be depleted from a deer is in that leg bone. So that's an index. We found that over the 700 plus deer killed by coyotes all over the state, including northern Maine, that over half of those deer were in good physical condition and would not be predicted to have died by the end of the winter had it not been killed by coyote. In other words, coyotes were taking healthy deer as well as the ones that were in poor condition.
What blows up that whole argument is when a bear or a coyote kills a fawn in spring that's 2 days old. Is that the weak, the old, the sick?
No, that's another example of non-compensatory mortality. They're taking it right from the population.
It's an opportunity. They're an opportunist.
Right.
And
The other thing we examined is the age structure of what coyotes were killing. And it looked for all the world like our hunting age structure. There was not one age class, well, one, female fawns, one age class out of everything from 0 to 18 years old that was not represented proportionally in the coyote kill any different than what hunters take in November. So that tells me also that not only were they killing deer in good condition, but no age class of deer was spared from this predation. Now, how can that be? How can it happen? Well, it happens because coyotes are chasers. They move deer ahead of them, and when a deer gets out into deep snow, greater than 2 feet, greater than the deer's belly, the deer can't defend itself. They bog down in the snow, and they're ripped apart. And this can happen in an opening, in a hardwood, or in a softwood forest with little openings that are little clear-cut edges. But if they can run the deer out in those thickets, those deer are dead.
what also I respect the animal. The coyote is a smart animal. They in a barren winter with no snow, they figured out they can drive the deer out onto the ice and do the same thing.
Exactly.
Once they're down on the ice, they're vulnerable. I feel like they're opportunists. They don't care. They don't go, this is Granny Doe, so she's old and sick. She's not going to make it next winter. I'm going to go kill her. They just do what coyotes do.
They are, perfect word, opportunists.
Yes.
Talk about opportunity killing a little bit.
Well, in this study, only 5% of all the deer we examined, and in this study we examined, if my memory serves me right, about 2,400 deer, including roadkills and things like that. Only 5% of the deer we found and examined could you say had starved to death. All the rest had some other either man-caused or predator-caused mortality associated with it. And at the time, we had no disease problem. We still don't have a disease problem. So that was not a big factor, right? Thinking of chronic wasting disease, and that type of thing.
So opportunity killing.
Opportunity killing is that's the coyote's bread and butter. It travels extensive areas, and a biologist in a generation before me, John Hunt, he was a fur bearer biologist. He said it succinctly: within a deer's territory and within a coyote's home range, a coyote knows every deer by its first name. Meaning that the coyotes go around, they test, they chase, and if they can get them compromised in deep snow or run down a partial cliff, I've seen that during my studies, they're going to be successful in killing them. They don't kill every one, but they are successful often enough to have an impact on the population.
First time I really saw the results of opportunity killings, I believe it was on the St. Croix. And there was a deer wintering area, and the coyotes drove them out onto the ice.
39 of them.
39 of them. And that wasn't the weak, that wasn't the old, that was whatever deer they could drive down onto the ice, and they fell through and drowned.
But it's in their DNA to chase and kill, and they'll do it with a full stomach and then move on to the next deer and the next deer.
That brings up surplus killing as a biological concept. This is a really neat one. It can happen with weasels. It can happen with fox. It can happen with any predator. The act of killing and hunting has very little to do with satiation of eating their prey. It's all about how easy it is to take an animal down. And in deep snow or on glare ice, that movie just keeps running as a continuous loop. I want to, there's another deer. I chase it. And it's down. It's dead. They go get another one. And it's just, they're not hungry anymore. It's just the hunting instinct. It's too easy for them. I had a personal situation. This isn't deer now, but I'm kind of a homesteader, and I raised meat chickens. I had 40 half-grown meat chickens in my barn, inside my barn, in September one year. It was 2010, and in one night, a fox came in, and he took and killed 30 out of 40 of those chickens. At first light that morning, as I always do, I go up to feed them, and I see there's a chicken here, a chicken there, just outside the barn. And all across my field, I found 17 chickens. 13 of them I never found. And that fox was going in dark of night, killing and running off, and when it stopped moving, it would drop it. He probably brought 13 of them to his den, and I knew the den across the road from me. But he just kept killing until daylight or I interrupted him. I didn't have a gun on me, and I didn't get a gun, but I wanted to see if there were other chickens in another part of a field where a pond is, and I walk over to the pond, and there's a fox, soaking wet from activity. It's September, and he's taking a drink out of my pond, and he looks at me, and we're about 40 yards apart. He looks at me, gives me a big wink, and trots into the woods.
Oh, geez.
Thanks for the chickens.
A few days later, that same fox jumped into a pen that I had geese in. He scaled. I watched him scale a 6-foot fence and get into that goose pen, which is that then and there was his demise. But that's surplus killing.
Yes.
They can't stop once it's going, and it doesn't make them exhausted.
And
If the act of killing exhausts a coyote, then that's it.
Yeah.
He's only going to kill one. He'll eat it.
yeah.
But
this,
if it's too easy, they just keep on
It
going.
gets easy in the middle of winter.
that's right.
And domestic dogs do the same thing.
Yeah, they'll just keep running. And we've had dogs on our property. I've had to call the wardens on. They kept getting out and kept getting out. I call that an ownership issue. They just were not keeping their dogs leashed up. And I want to get back to there is a gap between those that are promoting the protection of the coyotes, and I think reasonable people that would say this population needs to be managed in a way that other wildlife can be sustained. And that's the gap. Is there are groups out there now, and I see them at the State House every year. I have to battle them, who want to protect coyotes and just say, well, you know what? If we don't kill coyotes, then nature will bring things into balance. Until the opportunist coyotes. If it's a really bad winter with lots of ice, or it's a bad deep winter, their logic doesn't stand up unless they're okay with killing vast amounts of deer unnecessarily. So that's where we have tried to, as an organization, strike a balance. We don't want to kill every coyote that's out there. It's not possible. But we want to manage them in a way so that the deer population can be restored. And I think that's the gap that is out there now.
Yes, and Bob, you earlier alluded to whether there are more coyotes now or less. And Sam has had a part in this. Over the last 20 to 25 years, coyote hunting as a sport, as an activity for people to engage in, has just exploded. And there are, the department sells almost 10,000 night hunting permits for coyote annually. And not everybody kills one, not everybody kills a lot of them, but collectively, and this includes the central part of the state and southern part, thousands of coyotes are being taken every single year. And that, I believe, is helping to suppress coyotes from being as abundant as the antis want David to manage them at.
That's right. This is a battle. 3 times there was a bill in to basically protect coyote 8 months out of the year, and even regulate them further the rest of the year, so that managing coyotes was ineffective. And 3 times in 1 year they resurrected that. The other side did, and nearly got it passed, and we've had to battle that. What happens if they win someday? Well, what I want the public to know, you don't have to deer hunt or care about deer to be affected by an overpopulation of coyotes. They take cats, they take small dogs, they'll come right into your yard. It can be a complete nuisance. Livestock, young of the year in particular, are targeted. So suppressing and keeping the coyote population in balance with what we as I think we're the ones that are all Mainers are responsible for the proper management of its wildlife. That is the doctrine that we all as citizens of Maine have. So when they say they want no coyote management, they want the population to be what it's going to be.
To self-regulate.
To self-regulate means that every single Mainer at some part in their life could be affected by that same overpopulation.
Okay, well, so these people are saying we want to leave the coyotes alone. We want to let the population go to whatever nature will allow.
Yes.
And then the next day, they're talking about deer hunting, and they say, we want to keep the deer population at a level that we like because we don't want them eating our shrubs and running in front of the BMW and giving me Lyme disease from all the ticks that they carry. So you can't have it both ways.
You can't. We've done a good job, I think, with as sportsmen, keeping in balance all of our wildlife and managing it in a sustainable way. When a group comes in and disrupts that entire system by protecting one predator like a coyote that is so prolific, when your cat is, and I've had this call when I was a state senator. This lady called me, she was in tears. She had 2 cats, now she has 1. This coyote drove both cats up to the door. One was screaming while the coyote was killing it, and then the other one did get in the house, but she was once a coyote activist, now no longer, when she saw the results.
Not in my backyard.
That's right, because that does happen.
Bingo.
Yeah. So this has been very interesting.
Yeah, I could do this all day.
I could too.
Yeah. To think of a predator population like wolves or coyotes self-regulating, people don't realize what that entails. First of all, as you pointed out, there'll be more of them for a while.
Until they eat out the prey base. And then...
Yeah, but even when that happens, they will... conflicts among coyote packs or wolf packs will intensify, which means they kill their own, including their own offspring at times. So it's brutal, and they saw that in Yellowstone when the wolf population proliferated. And the other thing that happens at extreme densities with these any wildlife population is disease. Now, the contact type diseases of rabies and mange, distemper, and a whole bunch of problems will get into the coyote population. And I could provide you with all kinds of pictures from trail cameras of mangy coyotes in the wintertime. They're suffering horribly. And they lose all of their hair. They can't maintain body heat anymore. They're itching so bad that they can't hunt anymore. And all they want to do is eat my bait till I shoot them. You know? but a population that high is bound to have a lot of ugly features. The balance of nature doesn't exist. And it's brutal.
Yeah. I want to change the subject for just a second. You Gunlater Farm. I've had some of my deer processed at your farm, and over the years, some of the wildlife that you've processed is pretty unique.
You didn't. Wonder where he's going.
You didn't. I did. I had coyote sticks one day. And they weren't really that bad. But what I think would make an interesting podcast in the future is some of the unique recipes that you had for various wildlife that I just never would have believed would be really, really good. And it was. Well, I think beaver meat was pretty darn good.
But we got to tell the backstory.
Wait, before you do, have you ever had porcupine?
No, but I've heard it's quite good.
No, it tastes terrible, but there's no shortage of toothpicks. Sorry.
Right. Well done.
All right. And around 2010, and this is something I wanted to point out earlier, yet another thing that Sam did was, through the legislature, Sam revitalized the department's own coyote control program. Once the snaring program had ended in 2003, even though the legislature mandates the department to control coyotes, they didn't do it anymore. It was an ineffective thing that no one in the department was focusing on any longer. So through the legislature, we got the department to convene a workshop on revamping their predator control program. And Sam was instrumental not only in getting the legislative resolve passed, initiated and passed, but we wrote a control plan, an integrated plan for the control of coyotes in 2010, and presented that to the department. And believe it or not, they adopted most of the elements of that plan. So the department held 3 or 4 meetings, maybe 5 meetings, to revamp their program. And during one of the final ones at Christmas time, I served coyote snack sticks to all of the members that were there. There were legislators, there were wardens, biologists, there were 2 antis, there were foresters, including one that didn't take it very well. But at lunchtime, I presented a plate of these gorgeous snack sticks. They're kind of blonde, like you would make them with turkey. And that's what I said. It was turkey. And everybody loved them. And then when we got back down to business, I said, well, I got to fess up a little bit. Yes, these are made with a little bit of pork, but the rest of it is coyote. The very subject we've been discussing all this fall. Pretty good, huh? And most of them agreed it was pretty good.
And he ran
and others said,
I've never forgiven you, Gerry.
yeah, well, I know somebody else who hasn't forgiven me, and
Yeah, probably.
he got his political revenge. He's not with Sam. He's not with the agencies anymore. But
Yeah. Well, I appreciated the lesson that you gave us all. I want to segue. We'll do a podcast in the future on the right to food. When Sam put its weight behind the right to food amendment, it was because we were opposed to groups coming, especially Humane Society in the U.S., coming in and trying to shut down, say, the beaver trapping or bear management. Basically what they were doing with the bear referendum was shutting down bear management. And the right to food now protects us from that. I want to get into a future podcast, maybe the next one, because right now I'm getting pressure. There's been one individual who's trying to use the right to food to kind of get his way with the courts. He's failing, but I think the listeners should understand how critical the right to food amendment is, because I know of people who eat bobcat. I know of people who eat beaver. I know of people that eat coyote. I know that sounds wild, but it's true. Muskrats are edible. So that right to food amendment protects us when an entity comes in and tries to say shut down beaver trapping or beaver harvesting altogether. We can then go to court and defend ourselves. So that's a segue into, I think, a robust discussion that needs to occur around that right to food amendment.
it's all about marketing, David. If I had marketed those as yodel sticks,
Yes.
it might have gone over better.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I think there's a couple of really good podcast subjects that we can take up, and this is one of them.
Yeah, and if you folks think of any more, send the suggestions along through the internet or email or whatever, and we'll see if we can get some of your favorite or least favorite personalities in here to discuss the hot topics around hunting, fishing, and outdoor recreation in the state of Maine. Gerry, thank you very much.
I enjoyed
I
it.
always learn something when I get a chance to be around you, and I learned some more today.
Yeah, me too.
Well done, David. We'll see you on the next SAMCAST.